for children that are less than proficient at reading, given the enormous social pressure context on it, they're not the only way they can feel good about it, about not being proficient, is if they're one of the rare ones that are emerging in art or sports or music, or they found some other way to feel good about themselves, like reading doesn't matter. And you see the little kids, like you were saying, we talk to little children that are struggling with reading, and it's not important. They said it's not, reading's not important. Right? Or I'm stupid. Or I just can't read that well.
That's right.
Various ways of formulating a off-putting, protective membrane against how they'd feel if they thought it really was vital and important.
Right. Yeah, all different coping mechanisms to handle with that
those
basal.
Coping mechanisms aren't healthy.
No, not particularly. Well, not in all respects.
Okay, all right.
but they're probably helpful in I mean, they're adaptive responses. They're probably not going to be useful in terms of helping you overcome your skill deficit, but they're going to help you momentarily cope with the way you feel. And human beings are fairly well programmed to be very responsive to immediate needs. And we usually think a lot more about how we're feeling right now than about how proficient we're going to be 5 or 6 years from now.
For most of our evolution, there wasn't anything but now.
Yeah, that's right.
So organism is now oriented.
Now is a very critical and important moment for us. So you see these adaptive things, and it's not as though they're they're awful things that are happening.
No, I understand that they're organismically intelligent, adaptive strategies for dealing with this overwhelming feeling, and they're short-circuiting learning.
That's right. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that the attitudes and affect surrounding school, instruction, reading, texts, and all of those things are very maladaptive for kids that begin to experience different levels of reading failure.
So my point is that when we look at this as a whole, if we look at the step back and look at the nation as a whole and all the children coming through it, and the recurring cooperative research on adult literacy problems, right? It used to be that just only the National Institute for Literacy comes out 92 million. Everybody thinks, that's got to be nuts.
Right.
But subsequently, American Medical Association, Justice Department studies, study after study after study comes back to say, nope, looks pretty close to the mark and maybe bigger than that. Right?
Pretty frightening.
Yeah, so a third of the adult population is reading below the 5th grade level and engaging in, the correlation is 70% on average in prison, and health problems across the board correlates with reading.
That's an enormous impact.
Right? So we've got that big of, with nearly $500 billion in expense associated with it. And then we've got these children coming through school in which we're saying most of them are less than proficient. And we know that it's got psychological consequences, and know that it connects to the 92 million on the stairway to the, through the 90, and all of this comes down to the process of learning to read for those people is creating a learning disability. Right? I mean, the greatest learning disability in this country is the process of learning to read.
That's probably reasonably accurate, right? I mean, I think we need to make a distinction between the folks that you've identified on those national assessments that are less than proficient, and the students that the public schools formally identify as learning disabled.
Yes, I don't mean the neurobiological distinction that Congress has put forth in order to limit its liability exposure to spending money and so forth.
That's right.
But if we talk about it generally, if you look up learning disability in the general dictionary, not in the congressional definition for funding allocations, as this short-circuited disableness with respect to learning in certain domains or what have you, that the biggest, most common disability with respect to our capacity for learning in our society is the process of learning to read.
No doubt about it. And if you don't read proficiently, your learning is disabled to varying degrees.